Book it.
I'm not as well read as I'd like to be. There's just no time to read.
If you're like me, you're always on the go.
And there's always so much work to do. Either I'm busy cooking dinner, or I just have to read. Even hard finding time to reflect, pray, and meditate.
Follow me to find your next read. Adult story time for professionals.
Book it.
Hello and welcome to Adult Storytime for Professionals. I am your host, book reviewer, Ramela Janine El Karzezi, PhD in IO Psychology, BA in Economics, and this book seems to be about economics this week. It is Thorstein Veblen's The Theory of the Leisure Class, and it is a Oxford World's Classic. So I feel like I should have heard of this book before, and maybe as we start rifling through it, it will begin to seem familiar. But the fact that it's a classic means that a lot of people have read this book and like it enough for it to keep getting printed. So if you have never watched an episode of Adult Storytime for Professionals before, what I do on this show is I spend about a half hour talking about one book, and I read passages, I share my reflection on those passages. I do not give a thumbs up or thumbs down about if you should purchase the book or even bother trying to get a copy to read it. Instead, what I do is give some sort of indication if I will try to work it into my schedule. And that doesn't necessarily mean I think it's a good book or a bad book. It's just about, trying to manage my time. You have to try and manage your time. So hopefully this will help you decide about this particular book. Again, it is Thorstein Veblen's The Theory of the Leisure Class. All right, so looking at the back of the book here, we've got, in The Theory of the Leisure Class, Thorstein Veblen sets out to discuss the place and value of the leisure class as an economic factor in modern life. In doing so, he produced a landmark study of affluent American society that exposes with brilliant ruthlessness the habits of production and the waste that link invidious business tactics and barbaric social behavior. Okay, now that I'm reading this, it is honestly starting to sound a little familiar. Veblen's analysis of the evolutionary process sees greed as the overriding motive in the modern economy. It's kind of hard to argue with that. Although social, corporate, justice is a thing. A CSR is something that certain organizations care about and build into their business models, and kudos to those companies that do that. So with an impartial gaze, he examines the human cost paid when social institutions exploit the consumption of unessential goods for the sake of personal profit. Fashion, beauty, animals, sports, the home, the clergy, scholars are all assessed for their true youthfulness and found wanting. The targets of Veblen's coruscating satire are as evident today as they were a century ago. And his book still has the power to shock and enlighten. Veblen's uncompromising arguments and the influential literary force of his writings are assessed in Martha Banta's introduction. All right, so there you go. All right, so there's something about the author here. And again, since this is a classic, I think we should know a little bit about our dear author. So Thorstein Veblen was born in 1857 on the Wisconsin frontier, the sixth of 12 children of Thomas and Kari Veblen, who immigrated from Norway in 1847. At age 17, Veblen was sent away from the family farm to Carleton College Academy where he received his BA in 1880. In the following years, Veblen followed a largely unstructured life that included an early marriage, retirement to his wife's family farm, and on and off studies at Johns Hopkins, Yale, and Cornell before he picked up 2 doctoral degrees, one in philosophy and the other in economics. He was 35 when he procured his first academic post in 1892 at the newly established University of Chicago. So he piddled around and didn't really actually start working till he was 35. So I think he knows a little bit about the leisure stuff firsthand. So who has the opportunity to not start working till you're 35? But okay. Although he had a reputation as the newly established, I'm sorry, I'm mixing the lines here, forgive me. Although he had a reputation as an indifferent lecturer, a difficult colleague, and a bit of a womanizer, he gained recognition as a man with important new things to say about the relation of the ever-evolving cultural forces to current business transactions. Culled from the series of papers he presented throughout the 1890s before academic audiences, The Theory of the Leisure Class was published in 1899. Received with derision by those who clung to the old-style formulas of economic stability, it piqued the interest of members in the growing fields of sociology, anthropology, and psychology, as well as the novelists rising in protest against growing social inequities. And we still have growing social inequities, don't we? Veblen went on to write 10 books and countless reviews and essays to be dismissed from the University of Chicago and Stanford University by administrators embarrassed over his romantic life, to remarry after his first wife divorced him, and to venture into non-academic areas in efforts to support himself. Finally, unemployable and in failing health, he retired to a cabin in the California mountains where he died in 1929, the year of the great stock market crash. So, just from this arc, there seems to be some poetic justice with our Mr. Veblen. Or Veblen, I'm sorry, I changed the man's name. Veblen. Martha Banta is Professor Emeritus at the University of California, Los Angeles, the author of 6 books and numerous essays on American literature and cultural studies. She is the recipient of a Lifetime Achievement Awards from the Modern Language Association and the American Studies Association. One True Theory and The Quest for an American Aesthetic, her forthcoming book, treats the depth of Veblen's role as the champion of new modes of scientific inquiry that influenced many areas of social thought. So that's our players, boys and girls. All right, so anyway, let's see here. All right, so the introduction. And I don't see where things are kind of, oh, well, okay. Yeah, no, there's not really a context here. It's just kind of introduction, notes on the text, bibliography, chronology, theory of the leisure class, and there's no chapters in this. So it just seems like it's one long, uninterrupted stream of thought, kind of pulled together from these different speaking engagements that he had done. But anyway, let's check out this introduction here. Veblen's pivotal work. Everyone appears to acknowledge the importance of the theory of the leisure class, for has not Veblen's 1899 analysis of the socioeconomics of the affluent American societies introduced into the vernacular provocative terms such as conspicuous consumption, Yeah, I remember this guy. I remember this guy now. Okay, it's all flitting back to me. Anyway, it's so funny when you study something, and it's been a minute since I've been out of school. The theories that you don't necessarily, take inside, you forget who they were associated with. So maybe there was something about his whole thing, both from the psychology perspective and the economics perspective, that just didn't sit well with me. But we'll find out a little bit more, maybe. So anyway, where was I at here? Conspicuous consumption, still operative in a world that embraces the notion that greed is good and celebrates the Donald Trumps and the Paris Hiltons who clutter our Pinocchio culture. And I'm certain I butchered that word, so forgive me. The question remains how well Veblen's study is really known, both for what it represents within the range of his own long career and in the newly defined disciplines he guided into the modern world that have had a major impact upon our own understanding of the relations between business, industry, and social mores. When Maxwell Anderson, the well-known playwright, asked if he had read Veblen's book, he replied, "Why no? Why should I? All my friends have read it. It permeates the atmosphere in which I live. The theory of the leisure class is indeed a pivotal work. It followed after Veblen's early essays promoting post-Darwin methods of scientific inquiry that replace outmoded views of an unchanging universe with theories capable of deciphering ever-evolving societies and institutions. It began his championing of the heroic model of the engineer whose selfless concern for the production of essential goods countered the depredations of the predatory businessman solely interested in profits gained through the selling of useless products. What may still matter most is that it represents a major literary achievement, a work that rearranges how we look at our social structures and everyday behaviors. Besides being a very good read in narrative techniques, its stylistic innovations, its sheer gut raises the theory of the leisure class well beyond the level of other writings of its time that tried to ignite awareness that too much money in the hands of too few people had too limited a notion of what to do with their barbaric booty." Now that sounds like Chomsky. I wonder if Chomsky has been influenced by Mr. Veblen. Veblen's masterwork is deeply sociological in its implications, and his immersion in the late 19th century debates over economic theories is searingly on view. Just as important is the fact of its narrative force that places in it the illustrious company of contemporary social critics such as Jane Addams, Herbert Crawley, Eugene Debs, and literary figures numbering Henry James, Edith Wharton, Mark Twain, Theodore Dreiser, Frank Norris, and Abraham Cahan. Alright, so anyway, that's enough of the introduction. And then it touches on Veblen's career, talks about literary awards. Okay, alright, so here's something. Darwin and social Darwinism. By the late 1890s, the initial uproar over Charles Darwin's theory of evolution, viewed as the enemy of religious doctrine, had calmed down. Many professionals in the fields of economics and sociology, as well as members of the general public, happily took up the arguments advanced by social Darwinism, popularized by Herbert Spencer and William Graham Sumner throughout the 1880s. Darwin's theories of natural selection and the survival of the species derived from his biological studies were appropriated by sociologists as the means to explain why competitive actions on the human scene worked to the advantage of men who gave themselves over to aggressive business practices. All right, so that's kind of interesting. Stages of social barbarism. And I skipped ahead, I didn't read everything there. Veblen was alert to new evidence that raised new questions, such as the findings of anthropology, one of the rising sciences that provided fresh ways to examine patterns of social change. Inspired by the challenge to look back at the origins of human institution, Veblen opens the theory of the leisure class with an introductory chapter, intended or presented as a narrative akin to the Genesis tradition. Although his version lacks any promise that a full story will conclude happily with the revelation that the original fall was a fortunate one. All right. Well, you know what? Let's just, and then, just what I think, let's get on with the book. Here's another thing. Veblen on the sorry plight of women. After the introductory chapter, the theory of the leisure class strides forward with a series of detailed examinations of the human costs paid when social institutions, banks, churches, academies exploit the consumption of unessential goods for the sake of personal profit, while ignoring the disinterested modes of productivity and the pride of workmanship that furnishes a sound society with its necessities. Did I skip a page? No, I did not skip a page. Like, okay, where's the tie-in for women? Okay, so one of the more startling aspects of Veblen's assessment is the stress he places on the male's ownership of women achieved through the retention of entrenched customs. In Veblen's overview, the story of the rape of the Sabine women cannot be stuffed away in the musty archives of ancient history. No matter what refinements have been added to the contemporary modes of seizure, men continue to appropriate women to affirm their sex prerogatives. So he was guilty of what he was speaking about, I guess. Veblen called upon recent disclosures by anthropologists that the women in the most primitive societies once wielded great power. It was the latter advanced societies controlled by members of the warrior class that set the pattern for centuries to come. As for the wives of the late 19th century business tycoons, they were flaunted as trophies. Trophy wives are still a thing. Their bared bosom draped with jewels as proof of their men's wealth and success. Boy, have things not changed. That's interesting. All right. And there's further, unsettling arguments here. But anyway, let's just get going. So there's the chronicle of his life, if we're interested. And that's basically actually over 6 pages, which is interesting. When he was born, and then there's actually something about the historical and cultural background of the time when he was around, which is actually kind of cool. Like, for example, in 1889, Andrew Carnegie, The Gospel of Wealth was published. William James is the principle of psychology. It theorizes how instincts, habits, and our unconscious impulses shape human behavior. So, he was a product of those times. It kind of helps you understand, I guess, where he was coming from when he was writing. So that's actually a pretty cool chronology. I like that. The theory of the leisure class, an economic study of institutions. Alrighty. So the preface. It is the purpose of this inquiry to discuss the place and value of the leisure class as an economic factor in modern life, but it has been found impracticable to confine the discussion strictly within the limits so marked out. Some attention is perforce given to the origin and the line of derivation of the institution, as well as to features of social life that are not commonly classed as economic. At some points, the discussion proceeds on the grounds of economic theory or ethnological generalization that may be in some degree unfamiliar. The introductory chapter indicates the nature of these theoretical premises sufficiently, it is hoped, to avoid obscurity. A more explicit statement of the theoretical position involved is made in a series of papers published in Volume 4 of the American Journal of Sociology on the instinct of workmanship and the irksomeness of labor. Now that I remember. That what it said, I don't know, but the title. That is familiar. The beginnings of ownership and the barbarian status of women. Yeah. The argument does not rest on these, in part, novel generalizations in such a way that it would altogether lose its possible value as a detail of economic theory in case these novel generalizations should, in the reader's apprehension, fall away through being insufficiently backed by authority or data. Partly for reasons of convenience and partly because there is less chance of misapprehending the sense of phenomena that are familiar to all men, the data employed to illustrate or enforce the argument have a preference been drawn from everyday life by direct observation or through common notoriety rather than from more reconnated sources at a farther remove. It is hoped that no one will find his sense of literary or scientific fitness offended by this recourse to homely facts or what may at times appear to be a callous freedom in handling vulgar phenomena or phenomena whose intimate place in men's life has sometimes shielded them from the impact of economic discussion. So much vulgarity in the leisure class. All right, let's see here. Kind of skip around. So this is his introduction, I guess. The institution of the leisure class is found in its best development at the higher stages of the barbarian culture. For instance, in feudal Europe and feudal Japan. In such communities, the distinction between classes is very rigorously, Ramella, bless your heart, rigorously observed, and the feature of most striking economic significance in these class differences is a distinction made and maintained between the employments proper to the several classes. The upper classes are by custom exempt or excluded from industrial occupations and are reserved for certain employments to which a degree of honor attaches. Chief among the honorable employments in any feudal community is warfare, and priestly service is commonly second to warfare. That's interesting. I mean, so the whole idea of doing battle, I guess like knights, and that whole sort of thing is like the upper class, and they go out and fight and kill. That's just really interesting. I've never looked at it that way before. Indeed, this obvious productive character of men's work, that in the conventional economic writings, a hunter's work is taken as a type of primitive industry. But such is not the barbarian sense of the matter. In his own eyes, he is not a laborer, and he is not to be classed with the women in this respect, nor in his effort to be classed with the women's drudgery as labor or industry, in such sense to admitting of its being confounded with the latter. There is in all barbarian communities a profound sense of disparity between man's and women's work. And that continues until today. All right, so I'm just skipping around now if you hadn't noticed. Let's see. All right, habits of industry and thrift, therefore, are not uniformly furthered by prevailing punicary emulation. On the contrary, this kind of emulation indirectly discontinuances participation in productive labor. Labor would unavoidably become dishonorable as being an evidence of poverty, even if we're not already accounted indecorous under the ancient tradition handed down from an earlier cultural stage. The ancient tradition of the predatory culture is that the productive effort is to be shunned as being unworthy of able-bodied men. And this tradition is reinforced rather than set aside in the passage from the predatory to the quasi-peaceable manner of life. Quasi-peaceable. Let's do some more flipping here. All right, let's see. I am in the conspicuous consumption chapter. But there are other standards of repute and other more or less imperative canons of conduct besides the wealth and its manifestations. And some of these come to accentuate or to qualify the broad fundamental canon of conspicuous waste. Under the simple test of effectiveness for advertising, we should expect to find leisure and the conspicuous consumption of goods dividing the field of punicary emulation pretty evenly between them at outset. Boy, that word gives me a hard time. Leisure might be then expected gradually to yield ground and to be and tend to obsolescence as the economic development goes forward and the community increases in size, while the conspicuous consumption of goods should gradually gain in importance. Okay, as you can hear, my timer has gone off. Give me 1 second, I'll turn that off. Okay, so this particular book, while only being altogether, including this past, what is the last page here? Trying to get to it. Is 263 pages long, and that's including the explanatory notes. I think there is some interesting theoretical stuff in this book. I think with some of the things that we see in our world today, there is this idea that there are some people who have just too much. And I would be interested in learning more about how back, like 200 years ago almost, someone saw this problem and how now it is still a problem. It hasn't been like 200 years, but 1880s was a long time ago, and here we are in 2017, and it seems like maybe the distribution of wealth hasn't been rectified yet, or even thoughts about how to think about that haven't matured much since Veblen's time. But anyway, for me, this is interesting stuff, and I may try to actually work this into my schedule. Is it at the top of my pile? Probably not. But there's stuff here that I think I should know. So that's my take on Thorstein Veblen's The Theory of the Leisure Class, an Oxford World's classic. Thank you so much for watching this episode of Adult Storytime for Professionals. See you next time. Bye.